Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. The state budget was due April 1st, but it wasn't until May 2nd that the governor and the state legislature announced a $229 billion budget deal. The financial plan includes compromises on bail reform, the governor's housing proposal, and charter schools proposal, as well as agreements on education, the MTA, environmental funding, and much more. We've got representatives from both branches of state government here to break down the budget and tell us what it means to their Bronx districts. Please join me in welcoming from the State Senate's reformed 31st Senatorial District, includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Kingsbridge, Van Cortlandt Village, and Highbridge. It is Senator Robert Jackson. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Thank you.
And from the Bronx's Assembly 4th Assembly District, that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Mott Haven, Hunts Point, and Concourse Village, and others, Assemblymember Amanda Septimo. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Let's start with both of you, and we were just talking about it before we started the show, and talk about process. They've talked about 3 men in the room. Of course, now there's 2 women in the room. Are you satisfied with the way this process worked this time around? Does it still need to be reformed, or how do you view the process of how we got to a deal?
Well, I think that there's always need for improvements. We have the committee structure in place. I was part of the local government work group and higher education work group, and I don't think that we met often enough because during the budgetary process, in my opinion, there was not a lot going on, and we.
What do you mean by not a lot? When I look at the results, there was a ton of stuff.
No, I'm
going
talking
on.
about during the process. As you know, there have been several extensions, and while during the extensions, there was really discussions that were taking place, but nothing really coming forward as far as finality or in certain areas and to us.
Did you feel like you had enough input on on crucial issues, on the
I wanted to
controversial?
be in the room.
So he wants more than 3 people in the room, more than 3 men in the room, or in this case, 2 women and a man in the room. And what are your thoughts about the process?
I think anything in government is complicated. It's a collaborative effort. And I will say in the Assembly, the Speaker does a really good job of making sure that people's views are really represented. I do feel that there's general consensus building that happens in our chamber, and those thoughts are then taken into that negotiation room. It would be impossible if, all 200-something elected officials that make up state government tried to negotiate. We would never get to a budget.
Well, that's true, and everyone has their own point of view.
Exactly.
But, we had on-time budgets with Governor Cuomo, we all know, who's as strong a governor as anybody else. Was there something that happened this time, or was it there particularly thorny issues, which we will talk about, like bail reform and some of the other controversial things?
I think the governor had issues that were top of mind for her, that she made it so that we weren't going to move forward in the negotiation process until those issues got resolved. One of which is bail reform, the other of which is some of the housing topics, and that really delayed negotiations for a long time. And so I think that that's really how we got to a late budget. But I suppose those are questions you'd have to ask the governor.
When she gets here, we will. So then the communication between, for you, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and for you, Carl Hastie, and the members has to be really strong, right? I mean, in order for this to be efficient, right?
It has to be real and straightforward in your conference. When we go into conference, we have staff there. I'm talking about central staff,
right,
and staff of all of the members. And at a certain point in time, the leader asked for the staff of the members to be excused so that we can go into basically an executive session.
Right. So you don't need to get all the senators in one room to do it, and I guess it kind of funnels down to ultimately where they do that ultimate negotiation.
Well, I think the thing is that we're getting the real aspect of the negotiations, and rather than do that with member staff around,
right,
and as soon as, even before people leave the conference room, it seems as though reporters know it before we do. which is not the best thing.
That's probably not the best thing. Assemblymember, let's talk about bail reform. Is the budget the right place to discuss this policy? Because this was a policy-driven question. It was a very political question. As we know, I think many people felt that the governor was trying to embellish our criminal justice credentials with this. But is that the right place to do it? And are you satisfied that there was a tweak of some of the language for judges? How do you view what happened with bail reform? And you're going to get it next, Senator.
Yeah,
so hang in there.
I don't think that the budget is the right place to be negotiating something like bail reform. A budget is a financial document. It's the state's financial plan. It's why it matters when it's late. And when you start to muddy the budget with all of these policy issues, you create a time crunch in a way that I don't think is productive and healthy for the spirited debate that is supposed to happen around these policies, because this sort of finite timeline just doesn't allow for you to really have that robust discussion because you're under the gun. And I do think that governors in the past, and Governor Hochul doesn't seem to be an exception, make use of their outsized power in the budget to really force the legislature, which is meant to be a partner in government, but really forcing us to grapple with these issues in a way that feels inappropriate to me.
The new language removes a requirement that judges impose the least restrictive pretrial conditions. You happy with that? As a compromise, knowing that from a political point of view, the governor had to do something. I mean, we know what the last campaign was like. Do you accept that? You happy with that?
I don't agree, actually. I don't agree that the governor had to do something. I think that we have to make policy according to data, according to facts, according to the things that we know are happening. If we only made policy according to the news, I would hate to live in New York. And so I don't think that the moment called for it, and I thought it was
a side swipe at us in the media, but that's okay.
No.
I'll accept it.
I love BronxTalk.
I appreciate that. Senator, what do you think? You happy with the result of that, and it was a compromise from many electeds?
It should not have been in the budget. And if you look at the data basically says that the issue of on the street and in the media and the New York Post as to crime, and crime is going up, and statistics and shootings and stuff have gone down, and that is not the place. This is a budget, okay? And that is a policy. Let's move all the policy stuff out of the budget and deal with the budget. She talked about wanting to build 800,000 units of housing in the state of New York over a 10-year period of time. And that is a policy, but there's a cost factor with that policy. And as you know, what happened is that the local leadership, senators, assembly members, county leaders, and mayors, they're saying, well, we're willing to do certain things, but when you say that we're not reaching a certain goal, the state is going to mandate you. That's all. And so that was pulled right away.
Let's talk
because
about
that was an issue.
Let's talk about a financial issue. Tax the rich is the phrase we all heard. Many people said this is a way to reinvigorate state funding. It didn't make it. Why do you think the whole notion of taxing billionaires and corporations didn't get through?
Because they need to invest more in our state, and that's who has the resources. The working families, when you talk about a cigarette tax, you talk about a fair increase on the MTA. These are all fair taxes on the lowest economic point of view of the people of our city. And so we want these billionaires and millionaires to pay their fair share.
And so we've heard this. I've heard this from many electeds. Why do you think it didn't pass? It wasn't popular enough? The governor was going to hold the line on it?
Well, as you know, there's 3 people in the room. And you have 150 members in the New York State Assembly and 63 in the New York State Senate. And you have to come up with compromises. Okay? And then you deal with the governor. And as you know, the governor, in the process, has a lot of weight. And so as a result of that, that's important.
I think we're hearing what you're saying.
But the thing is, I wanted to say that that understanding, though, that at least during the period of time in which there was extenders, she did not throw in something that was going to force a crash, meaning where the sides would say, no way, we're not doing that. Right. That was a good thing. And so that opened the door for continuing discussion and negotiation.
And it sounds like, well, we give you this, you give us that, that kind of thing. I'm going to guess, because we've interviewed you a number of times, this was disappointing for you to see that we didn't, quote unquote, tax the rich this time around.
It's certainly disappointing for me anytime that we walk away from an opportunity to introduce more equity throughout New York State. The reality is that our tax system is imbalanced right now, and it favors folks who make more money. And tax the rich is a kitschy phrase, but in reality, it's a set of policies that say, if we're all living in this state and we're trying to create opportunities for everyone to prosper, then we all have to have a meaningful part in that effort. And for a long time, not everyone has had their fair share in terms of contributing to the effort. And so we're really just trying to rebalance the scales. So anytime we miss that opportunity, I'm disappointed.
I knew that's how you felt. And really what the
Consistency is what
senator
that's
said really made a lot of sense. It's saying, well, the people, who are paying the transit fares and all the other things that people with less resources do, it would seem to be imbalanced. Well, maybe 2024.
But now in New York City, with the Rent Guidelines Board, you see what happened.
Yes. It's funny. I had it on my list, but I said, technically it's a city issue.
Yeah,
so
but
we'll bring your council member
But what it
friends.
does is it shows the impact all of what's happening
Right.
on the people that are earning the least amount of money.
Assemblymember, I want to talk about the governor's plan to construct 800,000 new homes. This was a centerpiece of our housing proposal. Legislators were unwilling to sign on to that, and the final budget virtually has no policies to address the record rents and dire housing shortage. Again, I'm assuming that defines the words big ugly for you. That makes it look like a budget that you don't love.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the governor presented a package, and it's not that the legislature was unwilling to prioritize housing. It is undoubtedly the #1 crisis facing every New Yorker in the state right now. It was really a question of what is the package that is right for New York in this moment. The governor was presenting the plan to say 800,000 new units over the next 10 years with no mention as to whether those units should be affordable or not. And we know that that's something that's missing throughout the state. The
So
governor's
rather
package,
than build all those new homes, your point of view is we still have infrastructure here. We have people not able to pay their rents. The whole eviction question
right, we
was
need
up there.
tenant protections, but also we can build new homes. Sure, we can fix some of the supply issues that we have with housing, but we need to be specific about what types of homes. If we build 800,000 new luxury units across the state, that's not going to solve the housing crisis that we have right now. And so it wasn't that the legislature was vehemently opposed to the governor's idea of moving the state forward in housing. We're all in support. It's that we need to talk about how to do that best.
You expressed some dissatisfaction and some frustration that housing didn't get debated and publicized as much as, let's say, bail reform. Do you think that the governor's aggressive proposal distracted people, distracted the legislature from being able to have the dialogue that we're having now?
No, I think that we were internally really focused on talking through all of the big issues because we're in charge of all of the state and making sure that everything gets addressed. I do think that for a really core group of assembly members and senators, we were not going to endorse and are not going to endorse a housing package that doesn't include tenant protections. When you're thinking about good cause legislation or something like it, when you're thinking about building affordable housing for people who live in our communities right now, those are non-negotiables. And so I think there just wasn't space to get to a place that was comfortable in terms of agreement.
Senator, let's just talk about minimum wage. Where does the minimum wage fall in your own priority scale, your political priority scale? And are you satisfied? Let's see, the increase desired by many was up to $21.25 an hour, but now we're getting up to $17, which is up from $15. And in New York City, Long Island, and Westchester County, it would hit 17, in a couple of years. Where are you at with that whole
Well, let me
question?
tell you, I was at the press conference that Jessica Ramos held
Right.
on the issue of the minimum wage, and I'm more concerned not the minimum wage, but a living wage. That's what people need. And I had, my prop was, I took a dollar bill and tore it in half. That
I'm glad it
increase-
wasn't mine.
It wasn't a real dollar bill, but it was another one, in which basically that the increase was only like 50 cents. And so people are not able to live with the minimum wage. The minimum wage is, they said $15 is worth $12.50 or 75 cents. And so when it's $17, it's going to not be $17. It's going to be really like $15.
By the time you get that.
Yeah, come on.
So did you have a figure in mind that you would like to see?
21.25.
Oh, he was right there at 21 to 25. But again, one of the things lost in compromise, I'm assuming.
Listen, yeah, it was, but we have to move it. The situation that happened at the rent guideline boards is indicative of people saying, no, we can't, we can't live in this environment unless we have the money to live in it,
right,
or unless housing is affordable for every family.
I'll ask both of you this. You can go first, and then what is there sympathy for, let's say, store owners who have to pay that, and certainly we know our small businesses are having a hard time and who are going to have to pay those kinds of wages? Or are you more looking at, the fast food chains and those kinds of things?
Listen, I think small business owners are very, very important. And if you ask the governor, the mayor, everybody would tell you small businesses are the backbone of our city.
Certainly
okay?
in the borough of the BX, we
but
know that
the
to be
thing
true.
is, though, that we can't starve the people that are working in those stores.
Let's let the assembly member, what do you think?
I agree. We all love our small businesses and they're critically important. I do think that this is an issue where we have to raise the minimum wage. We have to get people to a place that's livable. And we don't have to choose. We don't have to make it so that paying people a living wage means that we're hurting small business owners. There are a million other ways we could
I have
provide
to
relief.
interject. When Jamal Bailey was sitting in that seat, he said, we can walk and chew gum at the same
Exactly.
time.
We could offer
I
tax
still remember
relief.
that.
We could offer support with unemployment bills. There's any number of things that we could do to help small businesses on the other side. So we don't have to choose. We can support our workers and support our small businesses.
And I guess the bottom line really is the bottom line, how to grow the economy so
Right.
everybody benefits. One way to fuel a good economy is with a good education system. I thought the notion that it was a record $34 billion public school funding in the budget was pretty good news. You're smiling.
Yes.
We finally got an Assemblymember Septimo to smile. Talk about the education funding that's in the budget.
Well, I think and I'm sure Senator Jackson will speak to this.
Yeah, that's right.
I think
It's
the most
very-
exciting part of the budget as it comes to education for me is making sure that we're keeping our commitment to funding foundation aid, which means that our public schools are going to get funded to the tune of the money that they deserve, so their students have access to the resources they need. I think that's the highlight. We have seen education underfunded consistently for way too long, and I'm excited to get into the meat of potatoes of all the policy around it now that we've finally all come to agree that you need to fund education meaningfully.
Well, so that's, you look at, does policy come out of a budget? Maybe there's a little raising of the priority scale of the importance of education. Charter schools. Let's see, the governor wanted 100 new charters. We ended up with 22, including 14 new ones in New York City. Why do we need to have a conflict between public and traditional public schools and charter schools? I mean, is that really where we're at? Because other electeds that I've spoken to have said, well, I'd rather put that money into, traditional public schools. What are your thoughts about this charter school question?
That's a good question. I don't think that all of this needs to be so tense. I think at the end of the day, everyone's interested in making sure that our kids have access to good, sound education. The charters that actually went into the budget aren't necessarily new charters. They're charters that have been issued and
call them
decommissioned.
zombies or
Right,
something, right.
because they will be sort of reissued. And I think that that's what compromise looks like. I do think that there's a lot of conversation about making sure that these charters are granted to underrepresented charter school leaders, so leaders of color in these schools. There's also talk around making sure that these charters are placed in districts that are not necessarily facing saturation, where you have so many charters in one area that they're draining the student body from our traditional public schools.
Or draining space, that's a very big thing. Just out of curiosity,
None of these will be
'cause
co-located.
I know you're close to your constituents. What do they say about their schools? They happy?
our constituents, my constituents, just care about their kids. They want their kids to go to a good school. They want their kids to
And
finish
so
third grade and be able to
they're
read.
not playing that game of charter versus public.
No.
They go, where does my child go to school?
And are they having a good experience? Are they having the supports that they need?
Are they?
The end. I think it depends on who you ask, and many times there are parents who are really undersatisfied, and we need to acknowledge the reality that your kid is only in third grade one time, so you're going to do what you need to make sure they have what they need.
So if they're dissatisfied, it's either to improve the public school or potentially find a charter school or some other magnet school or something like that.
Well,
All
let
right,
me just
this
say-
is your bailiwick. What do you got?
$2.63 billion was the foundation aid this year. Bottom line is, it took too damn long. 30 years to phase in foundation aid, where the highest court said every child should graduate high school knowing how to read, knowing how to write, knowing how to serve on a jury, and being able to hold competitive employment. It's too long. But the continual investment is very important. Mental health is a huge issue in schools and everywhere. And that's why the governor has put forward $1 billion in the budget in order to deal with that. Obviously, some of it is going to be to open up facilities now with up to 3,500 beds for people with long-term mental health issues. But community-based help is very, very important for individuals. So that's one thing.
Well, let me ask you about that. Should the schools have their own mental health officials, or is it better, like there are many organizations that provide mental health? Astor would be one of them that provides mental health services.
Sure. I mean, we're talking about community schools where that occurs, as far as they have mental health social workers and psychologists actually in the school. And there's bills on that in order to increase the money that we have in our system in order to provide those services right there for our children. But also from the zombies point of view, you know, this is opening the door of a floodgate. In fact, moving towards privatization of education, and I'm opposed to that. Okay, because the zombies or the charter schools, they're not governed in certain areas by the state education department. We had a hearing yesterday on solutions, not suspensions, which talks about the fact that we need to move away from saying you're going to be suspended for a week or a month or 6 months or a whole entire year, and deal with restorative justice practices for students and parents with respect to staying in the classroom. So,
CUNY and SUNY tuition increases were defeated. I know there would be applause around
you
the
see
table.
my
Yes.
thumbs up on that, right?
well-
We're happy for that.
You know, I'm a Lehman graduate, and when I attended, it was free. So let's.
City College was free also.
Try to get back there.
I say it to the young people who work here, and they're like, "What? What?" Let's talk about what I think both of you would agree was somewhat of a much like education became something that everybody endorsed, was the environment. We had policies to combat climate change, address environmental justice, and reduce emissions. Assemblymember, your climate and environment is a big issue for you and your constituents in the South Bronx. What do you think?
You know, this is, I think, definitely one of the bright spots in the budget. We saw the legislature pass landmark legislation a few years ago in the CLCPA, and now we're living through the implementation of these programs. How do we make sure that disadvantaged communities from an environmental justice perspective are prioritized? This is a budget that really does that, and also looks to the future with inclusion of things like the All-Electric Buildings Act, making sure that we are taking climate change seriously and prioritizing it at every part.
Do you? They say the New York Power Authority now has the responsibility to build and own wind and solar projects. I guess that's good.
Yes, this is building public renewables, which is not something that had happened before, and this really now makes it so that when we see that we are going to be falling short of reaching our climate goals, the state will step in and say, okay, we are going to bring projects online to make sure that there's nothing that is allowed to derail us if industry is not able to meet the charge at that moment.
I had the Power Authority here, and I asked about eliminating the peaker plants in the South Bronx, and he told me, "Oh, we planned by 2035," and I was like, 2035? How many kids are going to get asthma between now and then?
Right.
So
that's a critical part of why building public renewables is important, because that timeline has been kicked out further and further because of our lack of green projects online.
Senator, before we wrap up the show, do you want to just comment on the environmental?
Environment is extremely important. That's why I put forward a bill last year, which was signed a constitutional amendment that guarantees every New Yorker to clean air and clean water. People make the assumption we have that. No, we don't. And people said, oh, you only put that bill forward because, that people are going to complain. I said the only people that's going to complain are the ones that are polluting our water and polluting our air. And that's why, as far as environment point of view, you have the Cross Bronx Expressway where thousands and thousands and thousands of trucks come, and we need to deal with that because there's homes right outside of the Cross Bronx Expressway that are negatively impacting the people that live there.
Maybe the two things that we talked about that were raised, I mean, there's much more to talk about, which we don't have time for, that were raised up the priority scale in education and the environment. Maybe
Transportation as well.
And transportation, goodness, we didn't get
major.
to talk about the MTA and the experimental free bus lanes. But
And increased service across 11 lines. We beat back the fare hike.
What was missing? We've got about a minute for each of you. What was missing that you want to do next
The
year?
most important thing was a woman's right to choose in New York State. That was dealt with in the budgetary process. And so that's extremely important, especially what's happening with the U.S. Supreme Court and what's happening around the country.
New York has done pretty well. And so for next year, do you have any new sites, or it's just a continuation of the same sort of advocacy?
Fight, fight, fight. Housing is a human right.
Right.
Fight,
If
fight.
that isn't a Bronx attitude, I don't know what is. Assemblymember, for you?
I think we made progress on the minimum wage, but it's not high enough, so I'm looking forward to getting another bite at that apple and making sure we get it right. And again, balancing our tax system to make sure that New York is generating the money that we need to make everyone in the state have access to prosperity.
One of the important things to me is having the dialogue so people get informed. Assemblymember Amanda Septimo, thank you so much for joining us. Senator Robert Jackson, welcome to the Bronx.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this kind of interaction. It's been part of course, what BronxTalk and BronxNet has done for many, many years. We want to thank all the people who work on our program. We thank our producer, Rebecca Hemick. Our director, the senator's giving applause there. Our director is Nick Marrero. We have a cast of thousands working with us here in the studio. And next week, we're going to do something really special. We found a 3-month period 10 years ago where I had 3 different Bronx borough presidents on the show. So we're going to show you highlights from all 3 of those borough presidents. That'll be on next week's show. So we'll see you all. Have a good night.